Bibliophiles of the internet, my name's Adriana, and today I'm here to share what I read for the latest round of the Queer Lit Read-a-thon. Once again, the Queer Lit Read-a-thon is a wonderful event all about reading queer books created by two of the loveliest people, Kathy and Rogan. Their wrap-up videos will be down below, and you should definitely check them out. As far as my reading week, I'm pretty proud of myself because initially I was planning to read 4 books, and I was actually able to read 8. I kicked off the week with my Arc of Reverie by Ryan LaSala, which quickly became one of my new favorite books. This is an Own Voices queer SFF debut that just came out on December 3rd. I recently heard Ryan describe this as a gay teen battling against a drag queen sorceress for the creative rights to the world, which is a very good synopsis. The story follows Kane Montgomery, who is found by the police at the site of a horrible accident, and he has no recollection of what happened, how he got there, or why reality itself suddenly makes very little sense. Kane finds himself in this group of strangers who claim to be his friends, and all the while he's being chased by these shadow creatures he can't explain and falling into these surreal alternate universes that crop up at a moment's notice. I have honestly never read anything like this. There are definite parallels to draw between this book and Inception for sure, and I would personally say the ever-changing surreal landscape of this story calls to mind the atmosphere of the Raven Cycle, but it stands on its own and it is completely unique. This is a story that follows these people who exist between two worlds and navigate multiple realities in many different ways, and makes that journey into something that is literal and concrete. It gives those in-between characters power and puts them at the forefront, allowing them to explore the deeply held fantasies of their hearts, and puts them in these worlds, these reveries, where they're able to control what they simultaneously discover and create. These reveries are like subconscious fantasies, and when the characters are in them, they have very specific roles to play, and if they break those roles, it could have disastrous consequences. But at the same time, subverting those roles and disrupting the reveries in that way is also a necessary risk. And I think Ryan LaSala had a lot of fun creating those reveries and playing with all these tropes and cliches, but still leaving himself room to interject some really surprising elements and twists. The reveries at the center of this story are ultimately about power, about agency, about our deepest held desires and fears manifested into something real, and I think it shows the strength it takes not just to create the world, but to change it. This story is truly amazing and unforgettable, unlike anything else I've read. I really and truly would love for everyone to read this book, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. This was an easy 5 stars. Then I listened to Criers War by Nina Varela, read by Kim My Guest. This is another Own Voices sapphic SFF debut set in a world where androids known as Automa have risen to power over the human race, and there's a human servant named Ayla who serves the House of the Sovereign and is quickly rising in rank. She's essentially a spy working from the inside to exact revenge against the Sovereign for the massacre of her family and countless other humans. But at the same time, the Sovereign's daughter, Crier, whom Ayla serves, is also realizing that her father is not the benevolent ruler she once thought he was, and that she may be upholding a system that is deeply corrupt. I've seen some folks compare the political aspects of this story to The Cruel Prince, but I would actually say it's much closer to We Set the Dark on Fire in that it follows this person working from the inside to uncover political corruption with a background slow burn romance. It's very much a story about pain and rage and revenge set against the backdrop of this ever-shifting political landscape where you don't know who to trust, and that's what makes it a really exciting book. I love the dynamic between Crier and Ayla because Ayla is absolutely determined not to be attracted to an Automa because she finds that to be ethically revolting, but she's failing miserably, all while Crier is very much like, what are these emotions? She touched my body and life stopped making sense. What does it mean? Sorry, Crier, it means you're gay. I think their whole relationship is about wanting to be seen and known by someone, and how that's something that we all want so badly, but it's also the very thing we fear the most. We all want to be recognized as being ourselves and being different and being apart, but there's still a lot of circumstances where being different is dangerous. The story was well-paced, exciting, and it kept turning on itself in really satisfying ways. There were a few moments where I lost the thread a little bit, but I always picked it back up, and so for that I gave this one 4 stars. Then I was able to read my arc of Poems I Sleep Next To by Shelby Eileen. Shelby Eileen is a queer poet, and this collection is about a speaker falling into a relationship that becomes dependent and eventually turns toxic, and the poems show that speaker writing their way out of that experience. I think the poems in this collection may seem simplistic at first glance, but Shelby Eileen has such a beautiful awareness of self, and there's something to be said for the affirming, transformative power of these pieces. You can see the speaker telling themselves, what I've been through and what I've experienced is enough and is worth committing to the page. You get the sense that they're writing their own healing into existence. It's also very much about finding power in your softness and your pain, the importance of relearning how to do things for yourself, and how to confront the pain within you as you work your way towards catharsis. This collection comes out on December 30th, and I definitely recommend it along with Goddess of the Hunt. I gave this collection 4 stars. After that, I finally read Volume 3 of Our Dreams at Dusk by Gamatani Yuki. This is an Own Voices manga created by a queer, non-binary mangaka about a closeted high school boy named Dazuku who is bullied to the point where he considers taking his own life. But just before that happens, a mysterious person leads him to a local drop-in center for queer folks where he begins volunteering his time to rebuild and repurpose abandoned houses. Trigger warnings for suicide ideation, scenes that contain bullying and homophobia, as well as the use of homophobic slurs. This volume specifically explores the relationship between Dazuku and another volunteer from the drop-in center named Utsumi, who is trans. It is a very difficult volume because Utsumi runs into someone who knew him before he transitioned and who, for all intents and purposes, wants to out him to their former classmates. This person's intention is to allow him to be honest with the people who used to be a big part of his life, but at the same time, it's not comfortable because obviously he wants to do things on his own terms. Meanwhile, Dazuku is spending more time with his longtime crush, who by coincidence is doing some volunteer work at the drop-in center, but Dazuku is realizing that this boy has a lot of internalized homophobia that he's just sort of letting loose without considering who gets hurt. And to see these two parallel storylines where these characters are having to confront casual homophobia, microaggressions, and small everyday challenges to their identities, especially in people they know and care about, is so important because it's realistic. I appreciate this manga for showing that so much, especially because the more Dazuku witnesses Utsumi standing up for himself, the more he's able to develop that language and ability to do that in his own relationships. It is a tightrope of a conflict, and it goes to show how societal norms force queer folks into silence and shame, and how that silence often comes at the expense of future queer generations. There's a lot of things in this volume, in this series, that are really hard to face, but it's a necessary kind of pain that many queer folks have faced in their lifetimes, and it's great to see this volume addressing it with characters who overcome those circumstances. This is a beautiful, validating series. I gave this one 4.5 stars, and I cannot wait to read the final volume in this series. Then my TBR was promptly wrecked when Adriana Herrera sent out the arcs for her upcoming novella, Mangos and Mistletoe, which is a delightful Own Voices queer Latinx holiday romance. It's about this baking show very clearly inspired by the Great British Bake Off that's being filmed in Scotland, and our main character, Quisqueya, is anxious to prove herself on the show and land an incredible job opportunity, especially as an immigrant from the Dominican Republic. On the show, she's paired up with another Dominicana named Sully, a self-taught, self-proclaimed baking bruja who really wants to lean into their Latinx roots and flavors to win the show. But despite their budding attraction, Quisqueya is not completely sold on that concept. Once again, Adriana Herrera is able to strike the absolute perfect balance between fun, steamy romance and social commentary about immigration and how assimilation is posed as the ultimate goal for anyone who is different. Throughout this story, Quisqueya is hesitant to showcase her own background in her food, not only because it's painful as someone who had to leave behind their country, but because she's afraid that the judges and the audience won't take her seriously if she leans into that too much. And then you have Sully, who wants to go all out and is super unapologetic about her roots and her palate. She's loud and she's proud, but she's also somewhat reckless, and they're kind of both exactly what the other person needs. So initially they butt heads and they challenge each other again and again because they have very different strategies and perspectives, but their strength and their teamwork comes from that same difference. I like that about this author's stories, that she shows that romantic partners don't have to believe exactly the same things in exactly the same way in order to have a successful relationship and better themselves. Their fundamental beliefs are not that different, but they come at it from two very different directions, and that's okay. The steamy parts were fantastic, the competition aspect was really fun, and this novella had just the right amount of sappiness. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I gave it 4 stars. After that, because I had some extra time, I immediately turned to the audiobook of Sorted, a transgender memoir by Jackson Bird, read by the author himself. Jackson Bird is one of my favorite creators on YouTube and has been for many, many years. He specializes in making these incredibly thoughtful videos exploring the queer experience, especially as a queer trans man, and this is his memoir about coming out and understanding himself as trans. I was so in awe of this memoir the entire way through because it's a comprehensive debriefing on queer and trans language for beginners, it's an informative look at the logistic obstacles of transitioning, and it's a deeply emotional revelation of Jackson's milestones and experiences. Jackson has such empathy and awareness for the fact that his story and his experiences are not definitive nor exemplary of every trans person's experiences, and he makes a point to draw attention to that as much as he can throughout the book. When it comes to representation, the more voices we have out there, the more experiences we can begin to understand, and Jackson makes it very clear that his voice is just another voice in the mix. I personally found myself relating to a lot of Jackson's stories and how slowly changing small things about his appearance and his presentation helped him to feel free from things he didn't even know were keeping him trapped. He talks about the first time a stranger called him young man, or the first time he wore a binder in public, or how Chris Colfer's Golden Globe speech helped him to come out to his mom, and it's those moments that really bring you into his experience. And as you can tell from the title, there's a lot of allusions to Harry Potter and the sorting process, which I think is a great metaphor for how we see ourselves fitting into these preordained categories, but much like Harry, we all deserve the right to choose where we belong for ourselves. This was fantastic. It is both comprehensive and emotional and definitely captures Jackson's dad humor and cringeworthy puns and trademark voice. Honestly, I cannot recommend it highly enough. 5 stars. And finally, because I have no self-restraint, I read issues 7 and 8 of The Avant-Gardes by Carly Usden and Noah Hayes. This is one of my favorite queer comics about a basketball team at a liberal arts college who barely have enough players on the roster to qualify as a team in the first place. That's where our main character Charlie comes into play, because even though she's sworn to never again join a basketball team, that was before she was courted by the insanely cute captain of the Avant-Gardes. I've said it before, I'll say it again, this comic is like if Check Please or Fence met Giant Days, and it is just a pure delight. It's so refreshing to see this all-black cast of characters who are completely different shapes and sizes and builds with completely different identities and backgrounds, all supporting each other and existing together in one place. There's one character who's very witchy and does seances and recharges her crystals, and there's another teammate who's non-binary and a visual artist. There's a super moody teammate who has a side hustle as a stand-up comic. Every character is distinctive and vibrant, and they all bring something very different to the team, and it is all valued in that space, which I really enjoy. Plus, they all just genuinely love each other, and it shows. There was a moment when the captain was really down after a bad loss, and the whole team invaded her dorm room and did this impromptu marathon of the most inspiring sports movies of all time, just to lift her spirits and show her that whatever they do as a team. This comic has dynamic action panels, fantastic art, incredible characters, and it's super sweet and fun and queer, which is exactly why I gave both of these issues 5 stars. So those are all the books I read for the Queer Lit Read-a-thon. As always, if you've read any of them yourself, or if you would like to, leave me a comment down below, or let me know what was your favorite thing that you read for the event. But that's everything I have for this wrap up today. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you on the flip side of the page.